Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Warlords of Draenor Dungeon Guide. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the heroic mode version of the Bloodmaul Slag Mines, which can be located in Frostfire Ridge on Draenor. Now this dungeon has got a total of 4 bosses, and if you would like to skip to a specific boss guide, then please do click on the annotations that are on screen now. Alternatively, if you'd like to view a written version of this video guide, then please do head on over to flaskup.com or click on the link that's in the video description below. The first boss in this dungeon goes by the name of Magmolatus. However, for the first part of this fight, you'll be taking on his companion who goes by the name of Gug'rokk. Now, while you're fighting Gug'rokk, he will summon 2 elementals which you will need to kill. When he summons the Earthen Elemental, he will begin to cast an ability called Shatter Earth, which works a little bit like the Borer Drill if you think back to the Iron Juggernaut encounter, and you simply need to run away from it as it comes towards you. It's worth noting that it doesn't actually fixate on you, it'll just move in a straight line, so you just need to move to the side of it. The Earth Elemental will also cast an ability called Rough Smash, which will cause him to smash the ground, inflicting a high amount of physical damage to any enemies that are within 10 yards of him, and it will stun them for 2 seconds. Simply move away from this and don't get hit by it in order to avoid damage and being stunned. Now the Fire Elemental will cast an ability called Dancing Flames, which is a debuff that will be placed on players, which will burn them for a moderate amount of fire damage every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. Now if this ability is not dispelled, the Dancing Flames will jump to another nearby player. Now because this is the heroic mode version of this encounter, Dancing Flames will be placed onto 2 players initially, so your healers need to make sure they are dispelling both players that do get this debuff. As well as this, the Fire Elemental will also cast an ability called Firestorm, which will deal damage to players that are near the Fire Elemental. However, it can be interrupted as it is a channeled spell. Now this will deal a high amount of fire damage, so you do need to make sure you are interrupting it and or running away from it when it does start getting cast in order to not take silly amounts of damage. And as well as the abilities that the elementals are throwing at you, Gug'rokk will also cast an ability called Magma Barrage, which will cause him to target the location of a player and splash lava on the floor underneath them, which will deal a high amount of fire damage every 2 seconds to anyone that stands in it. Simple, don't stand in the fire mechanics apply to this ability. Now once you've brought Gug'rokk down, Magmolatus will then spawn and enter the fight, bringing in a new set of abilities that you're going to have to deal with. The first ability is called Withering Flames, and this is a dispellable debuff that will be placed on players, but if it's not dispelled, then an ability called Choking Ashes will jump to other players, causing them to take damage and have reduced attack, casting and movement speed by 25%. Because of this, healers need to keep on top of the dispelling so that the debuffs don't get out of control, and ensure that they are keeping players topped up, as the Withering Flames can deal quite a decent amount of damage. Now there is a new ability here called Slag Smash, which causes Magmolatus to smash the ground, inflicting a very high amount of physical damage to nearby enemies and stunning them for 3 seconds. Now the ranged don't really need to worry about this, however melee and tank should move away from Magmolatus when he is casting it, otherwise you're going to take the damage and get stunned. And finally, throughout the fight, Magmolatus will cast an ability called Molten Impact, which will cause an impact of lava to fall on the ground near players, and people will take damage based on how far away they are from the actual impact. So the further away you are, the less damage you're going to take. Now as well as this, the Molten Impact will also summon a Molten Elemental into the fight, which will have 2 abilities that you're going to have to deal with. The first ability is called Magma Barrage, and this causes lava to splash to the floor, inflicting a moderate amount of fire damage every 2 seconds to anyone that stands in it. Now you can interrupt this ability, and you should do if you get the chance, but if the ability does go off, then you just simply don't stand in the molten pool on the ground. Now the elemental's final ability is called Volcanic Tantrum, and this causes hot magma to erupt outwards, causing a moderate amount of fire damage to enemies standing in a line. Now this is something that you simply need to move away from, However, you can also interrupt this ability if you aren't that good at dodging the fire lines coming towards you. Throughout this fight, you're going to want to focus your damage on the Molten Elemental when it spawns, so that you don't have to keep on interrupting him, and then you can focus on Magmolatus. The Molten Elementals are going to spawn throughout the fight, so you should keep in mind that if enough damage is not dealt, then you could have more than one of the Molten Elementals alive at any one time. The second boss in this dungeon goes by the name of Slave Watcher Crushto, and throughout the encounter he's going to be jumping on you, knocking you back, and also summoning captured miners in order to aid him throughout the duration of the fight. This fight will also require you to move around quite a bit due to a frontal cone ability that we're going to speak about in a moment. This is one of his main abilities, and it goes by the name of Earth Crush, and this will cause him to summon a massive pillar of stone in front of him, which is fairly visible when it does spawn, and then he will kick it and stun anyone in front of him for 2 seconds, as well as dealing a high amount of damage to them. Now, it is fairly simple to deal with this ability, as you simply just need to move away from the front of the boss before he kicks the pillar of stone at you. Again, it's fairly easy to see where the stone's going to go, because it's a massive pillar that's right in front of him. Now, throughout this fight, you're also going to have to keep an eye on his ability called Ferocious Yell, as this will cause him to deal more damage to players, so healers should be prepared for this, and players should also use personal cooldowns if they are taking more damage than normal. It's noteworthy that this ability is interruptible, so you should try and interrupt it as many times as possible. Throughout the duration of the fight, Crushto is going to cast an ability called Wild Slam, and this will cause him to knock back anyone while dealing damage to them. Now, this knockback and damage is unavoidable, so your healer will simply need to heal through the damage that is being dealt to players. Once he's cast Wild Slam, Crushto will then follow up with an ability called Crushing Leap, which causes him to leap to players, smashing them into the ground. Because of this, you want to try and stay as spread out as you possibly can throughout the most part of this fight, and doing that will also help you dodge the Earth Crush ability. Once a target has been crushed into the ground, he will then order any of the captured miners in order to attack the crushed targets, and when this happens, your healer simply needs to keep an eye on the damage that the crushed player is taking and spot heal them as and when need be. Finally, throughout the encounter, Crushto is going to cast his Raise the Miners ability, which will cause him to summon his captured miners in order to aid him in the fight. Now, the miners have only got one ability, and this is called Traumatic Strike, which is a bleed effect as well as a damage taken increased debuff that will be placed on players. Now, if this debuff starts tacking up quite a bit on people, then you should look to use personal cooldowns and healing cooldowns as and when needed. All in all, this fight's relatively simple. It just requires you to spot heal players when need be, and also move away from the massive pillar of stone that's in front of him, while making sure his damage increase ability, which is the Ferocious Yell, is interrupted as many times as possible. The third boss in this dungeon goes by the name of Roltall, and this is the penultimate boss in this dungeon, and once you've defeated him, you'll be able to move your way onto the final boss, who goes by the name of Gug'rokk. But nevertheless, let's start with Roltall, and his first main ability is called Fiery Boulder, and this is going to cause him to summon a fiery boulder and roll it towards your group. Now what he's going to do is separate the platform into 3 different segments, so you've got the left, middle and right, and he's going to roll a boulder down each of these segments until he's rolled 3 boulders in total. Now, the order in which they come out will be random, so you will need to move in order to avoid the boulders and the high amounts of damage that they're going to deal to you. Now, what's worth noting is that on Heroic mode, once the boulders have reached the end of the bridge that you're fighting Roltall on, they're going to roll back towards him, so you need to dodge them for a second time. They won't change any direction or anything like that. They'll roll back in exactly the same lane that they rolled down in, and keep in mind that it will be kind of incremental at the rate at which they do roll back, based on when Roltall does actually release them towards you initially. Now once he has thrown the boulders at you, he will then begin to cast his ability, which goes by the name of Heat Wave, and this is going to be pushing you back while you're on the bridge, while dealing a moderate amount of fire damage to you. Now this is quite a simple ability to deal with, as you need to simply run into the Heat Wave ability in order to not get pushed back. It's quite simple really, and because on Heroic mode the DPS can be quite tight, you want to try and get as close to Roltall as you possibly can, so that you can stay in range in order to damage him, while you are also being pushed back / running on the spot. This will persist for 8 seconds, so you do kind of need healers to spot heal as and when possible, and make sure that people don't go out of range while you are trying to heal them up. Now, once he has tried to push your group back, he will then try and set you on fire, which is nice of him I guess, with an ability called Burning Slag. Now, this will cause him to throw fire at the bridge that players are standing on, and this ability is going to act as the soft enrage for this encounter, as eventually the bridge will fill up with fire and you're going to have nowhere to stand or move to. Now when the fire first starts getting thrown down, there will be empty spaces on the bridge for you to move to, and these are kind of your safe zones until they inevitably do get covered with fire. Of course, the more fire on the bridge, the harder it's going to be in order to dodge the fiery boulders, and also to not get pushed back into the Heatwave ability. And finally, on the Heroic mode version of this fight again, you're going to have to deal with an ability called Scorching Aura, but this is a fairly simple ability that you do have to deal with. And this is a buff that the boss is going to place on himself, meaning that anyone who comes close to him is going to have their cast speed drastically reduced by 100%. Now, since melee don't have cast speeds, you simply need to make sure that your ranged and healers are going to be standing at a distance when attacking the boss. Obviously this means you can't get too close in order to run into the Heatwave ability, but your melee can stay as close as they need to. It's kind of key that you are positioning yourselves in a smart place during this fight, especially when you're coming to avoid fiery boulders, so that you're not kind of finding yourselves running through fire unnecessarily. Once Roltall has been defeated, you will then get to move on to the final boss in this dungeon, who goes by the name of Gug'rokk. Now this guy is basically an ogre that's got a very bad attitude problem, and he's going to throw a plethora of fire-based abilities at you in order to try and bring down your raid and stop you from claiming the Bloodmaul Slag Mines for your own. Now one of the main abilities you're going to have to deal with throughout this fight is called Unleashed Flames. And this is going to cause Gug'rokk to summon elementals that are going to move towards one of the kilns that you can see around the outside of the room. Now, once these do reach the kilns, they are going to explode and cast an ability called Empowered Flames, which will inflict a high amount of fire damage to all players every 3 seconds. So, logically, you want to stop the little elementals from making it to the kilns. And this can be done by using slowing abilities, stunning abilities, and also getting your DPS players in order to switch to them as soon as they spawn, and DPSing them down and killing them off. It's worth noting that if you don't deal enough damage to them, Gug'rokk can cast Unleashed Flames again, meaning you're going to have 2 elementals up, and you're going to have twice the trouble to deal with, and your healers aren't going to keep up if they do eventually reach the kilns. As well as this, throughout the fight, Gug'rokk is going to spawn pools of magma under players with his Magma Eruption spell. Now each pool is going to persist for 2 minutes, and players should avoid standing in them while they are active, as they do deal a moderate amount of fire damage. Now we found that positioning yourselves as a group will kind of influence where the pools do spawn, since they do spawn underneath people. So if you can try and, say, put a marker on one person, stay stacked up as much as possible and move as a group, you're going to be able to control where the pools do spawn, and making sure that the room doesn't get overrun in the 2 minutes before they do start to despawn. Throughout the fight, he's also going to cast an ability called Molten Blast, which is going to blast a random player in the group, and also grant Gug'rokk a stack of Molten Core, which will increase his damage by 10% for 1 minute, and can stack up to 3 times. Now it's vital to note that when this stack of Molten Core reaches 3, he will explode and deal fire damage to everyone in the raid or party by casting an ability called Molten Barrage. Now, because of this, you want to try and interrupt the Molten Blast ability as many times as possible, in order to stop him from reaching 3 stacks of Molten Barrage, especially in the heroic mode version of this fight, because your healers are simply not going to be able to keep up with the damage. If Molten Barrage is going to go off, then you should use some form of a personal cooldown in order to reduce the damage you're going to take, and also help your healers out throughout the rest of the fight. Now on the heroic mode version of this fight, Gug'rokk is also going to gain an ability called Flame Buffet, which he will place on every player, which deals a high amount of fire damage and also increases the player's fire damage taken by 5% for 20 seconds. Now, while this debuff is on your players, you should make sure that they're not taking any additional damage from the abilities such as Magma Eruption, as it's going to really hurt them. So you need to keep in mind that at any time during this fight you can take increased fire damage. So you need to make sure that the Molten Blasts aren't going off, as they could potentially one-shot people. You need to make sure you're not standing in the Magma Eruption, as the moderate damage will go into insanely painful damage. And you also need to make sure that you're killing the Unleashed Flames elementals, so that they don't get to cast their Empowered Flames abilities. It is worth noting that the Flame Buffet ability can be dispelled, but your healers don't want to be spending the entire fight dispelling everybody as soon as they get the debuff. So what you want to do is prioritize removing it from the tank before anybody else, and then maybe let it stack up a little bit and periodically remove it from players that will have more cooldowns available to them in order to reduce damage they are taking. So if you've got a player that's got 1 cooldown, you want to be dispelling them first, whereas if you've got a player that's got, say, 3 personal cooldowns, you want to be dispelling them later on, as they can mitigate more damage. All in all, this fight is just about sticking together as a group, killing off the elementals, and making sure you're interrupting the right thing at the right time. Keep in mind that while you're stacked up as well, this can also benefit certain healing classes, such as Restoration Druids, as they do have AoE heals that can be placed on the ground. So that's going to wrap it up for this Warlords of Draenor dungeon guide for the Bloodmaul Slag Mines. If you would like to view a written version of this guide, then there's a link available in the video description below, or you can simply head on over to flaskup.com and hover over the dungeon guides option at the top of the page. As always, thank you for watching, and if you are interested in future Warlords of Draenor dungeon or raiding guides, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel.